The tires screeched as the old pickup truck tore down the empty road, headlights slicing through the Georgia night. Ethan, barely 20, gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, while Caleb, his boyfriend, clutched the door, eyes darting to the side mirror where the glow of pursuing headlights flickered. They weren't just running from a town, they were running for their lives. It was 2005, and Mill Creek, Georgia, a small, conservative town nestled in the shadow of Atlanta, didn't take kindly to two boys in love. Ethan and Caleb had been careful, meeting in secret behind the old mill or in the woods where the river bent. But secrets don't last in a place where everyone knows your name. That night, at the town's annual fair, someone had seen them steal a kiss behind the cotton candy stand. By sundown, a mob had formed, men with clenched fists, women whispering venom, and a preacher shouting about sin. Ethan's father, a deacon at the local church, led the charge, his face twisted with shame and rage. "You're no son of mine," he'd spat, as the crowd pushed Ethan and Caleb toward the town's edge. They'd barely made it to the truck before the first rock hit the windshield, spiderwebbing the glass. Caleb's hand found Ethan's thigh, a silent plea to keep going. "Don't look back," Caleb whispered, his voice trembling but firm. Ethan didn't. He pressed the gas pedal harder, the engine roaring as Mill Creek faded into the dark. They were 20, in love, and now, officially, outcasts. The road stretched endless, a ribbon of asphalt under a starless sky. Ethan's mind raced. Where would they go? They had $200 between them, a half tank of gas, and a duffel bag stuffed with clothes. Caleb, always the planner, pulled a crumpled map from the glove box. "Atlanta," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "We'll start over there. We'll be safe." Ethan wanted to believe him, but the sting of his father's words lingered, sharp as a blade. Mill Creek had been home his mother's garden, the diner where he'd worked summers, the creek where he'd learned to swim. Now, it was a place that wanted him gone. Atlanta was a world away, even at just 60 miles. The city buzzed with possibility, but for two small-town boys, it was overwhelming. They found a cheap motel on the outskirts, the kind with flickering neon signs and questionable stains on the carpet. Caleb counted their cash under the dim glow of a lamp, his brow furrowed. "We'll get jobs," he said, his optimism a lifeline. Ethan nodded, but doubt gnawed at him. He'd never felt so small, so unmoored. Days turned to weeks. Ethan found work at a construction site, hauling bricks under the Georgia sun, while Caleb waited tables at a diner that didn't ask too many questions. They rented a tiny apartment in a rough part of town, the walls thin enough to hear their neighbors' fights. But it was theirs. At night, they'd lie on a mattress on the floor, Caleb's head on Ethan's chest, dreaming of a future where they didn't have to hide. One day, Caleb would say, "We'll have a house, a real one, and no one will care who we love." But the past wasn't done with them. Ethan's father had connections, and word of their whereabouts trickled back to Mill Creek. One night, a brick crashed through their apartment window, wrapped in a note, "Fags don't belong here." Ethan's hands shook as he swept up the glass, his anger boiling. Caleb, ever calm, pulled him close. "They can't break us," he said. But Ethan wasn't so sure. The world felt like it was closing in, and Mill Creek's shadow loomed large. By the end of their first month in Atlanta, Ethan was fraying. The long hours, the constant fear, the whispers from coworkers who'd overheard too much, it was too heavy. Caleb, though, was a rock. He'd enrolled in night classes at a community college, determined to become a lawyer. "We're building something," he'd tell Ethan, his eyes bright with hope. Ethan wanted to believe him, but the weight of being chased out, of being unwanted, clung to him like damp clothes. One evening, as they walked home from the diner, a group of men stepped out from an alley. Ethan recognized the type small-town toughs, the kind who'd thrown rocks in Mill Creek. "You the queers from up north." One sneered, cracking his knuckles. Ethan stepped in front of Caleb, heart pounding. "Walk away," he said, voice low. The men laughed, but Caleb's hand on Ethan's arm stopped him from swinging. "Not worth it," Caleb whispered, pulling him back. They ran, the men's laughter echoing behind them. That night, Ethan broke down, sobbing into Caleb's shoulder. "I can't keep running," he said. Caleb held him tighter. "Then we'll fight," he said. "But we do it smart." The Atlanta years hardened Ethan, but Caleb's fire kept them moving forward. By 2007, Caleb was halfway through his law degree, juggling classes and late-night shifts. Ethan, meanwhile, had moved from construction to a warehouse job, the kind that left his hands calloused and his back aching. Their apartment was still small, but it was home filled with second-hand furniture, Caleb's law books, and a single photo of them at a pride parade, arms around each other, smiling like the world couldn't touch them. But the world kept trying. The brick through their window wasn't the last threat. Graffiti appeared on their door one morning, "Leave or else." Ethan wanted to fight, to track down whoever did it. But Caleb was strategic. He filed a police report, documented every incident, and started attending local LGBTQ advocacy meetings. "We're not just surviving," he told Ethan. "We're building a life." Ethan admired Caleb's resolve, but he struggled to share it. The hate felt personal, like Mill Creek had followed them, refusing to let go. One night, Caleb came home with a flyer for a community organizing event. "This could change things," he said, eyes alight. Ethan was skeptical but went along. The meeting was in a cramped church basement, filled with people like them outcasts, dreamers, fighters. Ethan listened as they talked about policy changes, safe spaces, and legal protections. For the first time, he felt a spark of something bigger than survival. Caleb thrived there, his voice steady as he spoke about justice. Ethan watched him, proud but envious of his clarity. Their life settled into a rhythm. Caleb graduated, landed a job at a small legal aid firm, and started representing marginalized communities. Ethan took night classes, too, studying business, though he felt out of place among younger students. They saved every penny, dreaming of a house, but Atlanta's cost of living kept that dream distant. Still, they had each other, and that was enough most days. The past resurfaced in 2010, when Ethan's mother called. She tracked him down through a mutual friend. "Your father's sick," she said, her voice heavy. "He wants to see you." Ethan froze, the phone trembling in his hand. Caleb, sitting across from him, shook his head. "You don't owe him anything," he said. But Ethan's heart tugged. He hadn't spoken to his parents in 5 years, not since the night they'd run him out of Mill Creek. Against Caleb's advice, he drove back. Mill Creek hadn't changed. The same tired storefronts, the same church steeple looming over the square. His father, frail in a hospital bed, looked smaller than Ethan remembered. "I was wrong," his father whispered, tears in his eyes. "I let hate blind me." Ethan wanted to forgive, but the words stuck in his throat. He left without saying much, the weight of those years too heavy to lift in one visit. His mother hugged him, promising to keep in touch, but Ethan knew Mill Creek wasn't home anymore. Back in Atlanta, Caleb was waiting, his arms open. "You okay?" he asked. Ethan shook his head. "I don't know who I am there anymore," he admitted. Caleb kissed his forehead. "You're enough here." That night, they made a pact they'd build a life so strong no one could tear it down. By 2012, Caleb's work was gaining attention. He won a case against a landlord who'd evicted a gay couple, earning a small feature in a local paper. Ethan, now managing a warehouse, felt a quiet pride but also a growing restlessness. He wanted more not just for himself, but for them. One night, over cheap wine, he told Caleb, "I want to go into politics." Caleb raised an eyebrow, surprised. "You? A politician?" Ethan laughed, but he was serious. "I want to change things. Like you do. Make it so no one else gets chased out." Caleb supported him, as always. Ethan started small, volunteering for local campaigns, learning the ropes. He was good with people, his small-town charm disarming even the skeptics. By 2015, he was running for city council in a progressive Atlanta district. The campaign was grueling door-knocking, debates, and the occasional heckler shouting slurs. Caleb was by his side, writing speeches and keeping Ethan grounded. When Ethan won, they celebrated with a quiet dinner, toasting to a future they were finally shaping. But Mill Creek still lingered in Ethan's mind. He hadn't returned since his father's death, but the town's rejection fueled him. He wanted to prove them wrong not just for himself, but for every kid who'd ever felt unwanted. Caleb saw it, too. One day, he said, "You'll go back, and you'll show them what they lost." Ethan's council seat was a victory, but it came with a spotlight. Atlanta's political scene was kinder than Mill Creek, but not without its thorns. Anonymous letters arrived at their apartment, some with veiled threats, others with outright hate. "You don't belong in office," one read. Ethan tossed them in the trash, but Caleb kept a file, just in case. "We've been through worse," Caleb said, his lawyer's mind always planning ahead. Ethan nodded, but the words stung. He was 30 now, and the weight of being other never fully lifted. Their life together deepened. They bought a small house in a quiet Atlanta suburb, a fixer-upper with a sagging porch and a yard just big enough for a garden. Caleb planted roses, a nod to Ethan's mother, who'd loved them. Ethan, meanwhile, threw himself into his work. He pushed for affordable housing, better schools, and protections for marginalized communities. His colleagues respected his grit, but some whispered about his lifestyle. Ethan ignored them, focusing on the win-small policies that made life easier for people like him and Caleb. Caleb's career was soaring, too. He joined a larger firm, taking on high-profile cases for LGBTQ rights. His name started appearing in national outlets, and Ethan couldn't help but feel a twinge of envy. Caleb was a star, while Ethan was still grinding, proving himself in council meetings. But Caleb always brought him back. "We're a team," he'd say, pulling Ethan into a hug. "Your wins are mine." In 2017, a crisis hit. Caleb was diagnosed with lymphoma. The news came like a punch, stealing the air from their little house. Ethan sat by Caleb's hospital bed, holding his hand as the doctor explained treatment options. Chemo, radiation, months of uncertainty. Caleb, ever the optimist, cracked a joke about his bald head being aerodynamic. Ethan tried to laugh, but fear gripped him. He couldn't lose Caleb not after everything. The next year was a blur. Ethan juggled council duties and hospital visits, his world shrinking to Caleb's bedside. Caleb fought hard, his body weakening, but his spirit fierce. "Don't let this stop you," he told Ethan one night, his voice hoarse. "You're meant for bigger things." Ethan choked back tears, promising to keep going. Friends rallied around them, bringing meals and support, but the fear of loss was a constant shadow. Caleb pulled through, his cancer in remission by 2019. They celebrated with a trip to the coast, walking hand in hand along Tybee Island's shore. The ocean stretched endless before them, And for the first time in years, Ethan felt free. "We're unstoppable," Caleb said, his smile brighter than the sun. Ethan believed him. They were 34, battle-tested, and stronger than ever. Ethan's political ambitions grew. He ran for a state Senate seat in 2020, a bold move that drew attention. His campaign leaned on his story small-town kid, chased out for who he loved, now fighting for others. It resonated. Voters saw his authenticity, his scars. He won by a slim margin, and the victory felt like a middle finger to Mill Creek. Caleb, healthy again, was his biggest cheerleader, though he worried about the toll politics took on Ethan. "Don't lose yourself," he'd say, grounding him. The state Senate was a new beast. Ethan navigated a world of backroom deals and entrenched power, but he never forgot why he was there. He sponsored bills for hate crime protections and equal housing, drawing on his and Caleb's experiences. His speeches were raw, emotional, and people listened. But Mill Creek still haunted him. He'd drive by the exit sign on I-20, his stomach nodding, and wonder what it would take to face that town again. In 2022, Caleb proposed. It was simply no grand gestures, just the two of them on their porch, the roses blooming behind them. "We've been through hell," Caleb said, sliding a ring onto Ethan's finger. "Let's make it official." Ethan laughed through tears, saying yes. Their wedding was small, surrounded by friends who'd become family. Ethan's mother came, her eyes wet with pride. Mill Creek felt like another lifetime, but its shadow lingered in Ethan's quiet moments. By 2024, Ethan was a rising star. Political insiders whispered about him as a mayoral candidate not for Atlanta, but for Mill Creek. The idea was audacious. Mill Creek's mayor, a relic of the old guard, was retiring, and the town was changing younger, more diverse, less rigid. Caleb was skeptical but saw the fire in Ethan's eyes. "If you do this," he said, "you do it for us. For every kid like us." Ethan nodded. He was ready to go home not to beg, but to reclaim. Ethan's decision to run for mayor of Mill Creek was a gamble, but he'd never backed down from a fight. In early 2025, he and Caleb packed up their Atlanta life and moved back to the town that had once rejected them. The drive felt surreal, the familiar oak-lined streets stirring memories of fear and flight. Their new home was a modest house on the edge of town, close enough to feel connected, far enough to breathe. Caleb, now a partner at his firm, could work remotely, but he took a leave to support Ethan's campaign. "This is our stand," he told Ethan, his voice steady. Mill Creek had changed, but not entirely. The diner still served greasy burgers, and the church still drew crowds on Sundays. But new faces, young families, artists, and transplants from Atlanta had softened the town's edges. Still, Ethan's return sparked whispers. "That's the kid they ran out," people said at the gas station. Some looked at him with curiosity, others with disdain. Ethan ignored the stares, focusing on his campaign. He knocked on doors, shook hands, and told his story, a boy exiled for love, now back to build a better Mill Creek. His opponent, Tom Hargrove, was a local businessman with deep ties to the old guard. Hargrove leaned hard into traditional values, his ads thinly veiled attacks on Ethan's identity. "Mill Creek needs a leader who respects our roots," he'd say, his smile sharp. Ethan countered with policies, job growth, better schools, inclusivity, but the campaign grew ugly. Flyers appeared in mailboxes, calling Ethan a sinner unfit to lead. One night, their campaign signs were defaced with slurs. Caleb, ever the lawyer, documented everything, urging Ethan to stay focused. "They're scared," he said. "That means you're winning." The first debate was a crucible. The town hall was packed, the air thick with tension. Hargrove painted Ethan as an outsider, a city boy who'd abandoned Mill Creek. Ethan stood tall, his voice steady. "I didn't abandon this town," he said, eyes scanning the crowd. "This town abandoned me. I'm here to make sure no one else is cast out for who they are." The room went silent, then erupted in murmurs. Some clapped. Others shifted uncomfortably. Ethan felt Caleb's hand squeeze his later. A silent "you did good." But the past wasn't done haunting them. Ethan's mother, now widowed, lived quietly in Mill Creek. She supported his campaign, but warned him about old grudges. "Some folks here haven't changed," she said over coffee. Ethan nodded, but he saw the town's potential, a place where kids like he'd been could feel safe. He leaned on Caleb, who organized rallies and charmed voters with his easy smile. They were a team, unstoppable, but the strain was real. Late nights, Ethan would find Caleb staring out their window, worry creasing his brow. "We'll make it," Ethan promised, kissing his temple. As election day neared, the attacks intensified. A local pastor, echoing Ethan's father from 20 years ago, preached against him, calling his campaign an affront to God. Ethan felt the old wounds reopen, but Caleb kept him grounded. "You're not that scared kid anymore," he said. "You're a leader." Ethan drew strength from that, pouring his heart into every speech. He talked about unity, about a Mill Creek where everyone belonged. Young voters, especially, rallied to him, their energy a stark contrast to the old guard's fear. A week before the election, a scandal broke. A local paper uncovered Hargrove's shady business deals, kickbacks, tax evasion. Ethan stayed above the fray, focusing on his message. But the damage was done. Hargrove's support waned. Still, Ethan knew the race was tight. Mill Creek wasn't Atlanta, and old prejudices died hard. He and Caleb worked tirelessly, knocking on doors until their knuckles ached. Their love a quiet defiance against the town's lingering hate. The night before the election, Ethan stood on their porch, staring at the stars. Caleb joined him, wrapping an arm around his waist. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Caleb said, "we've already won. We came back." Ethan leaned into him, feeling the weight of 20 years, the fear, the fight, the love that had carried them through. "I want to make you proud," Ethan whispered. Caleb smiled. "You already have." Election day dawned crisp and clear. Ethan voted early, Caleb by his side, their rings glinting in the morning light. The polls were busy, the town buzzing with anticipation. Ethan felt every eye on him, but he stood tall. This was his home, and he was ready to fight for it. The polls closed at 7 p.m., and the wait began. Ethan and Caleb gathered with supporters at a local community center, the air humming with nervous energy. Volunteers tallied early results on a whiteboard, each number a heartbeat in the room. Ethan stood by Caleb, their fingers intertwined, his stomach a knot of hope and dread. Mill Creek's future hung in the balance, and with it, their chance to rewrite the past. By 10 p.m., the race was neck and neck. Hargrove led in rural precincts, but Ethan dominated the town center, where younger voters turned out in droves. Caleb kept the mood light, cracking jokes and passing out coffee, but Ethan saw the worry in his eyes. When the final precinct reported, the room erupted. Ethan had won by 312 votes. Cheers filled the air, but Ethan stood frozen, the weight of it sinking in. He was Mill Creek's mayor. Caleb pulled him into a hug, whispering, "You did it." Ethan buried his face in Caleb's shoulder, tears stinging his eyes. This wasn't just a win. It was redemption. The boy chased out 20 years ago was now the man who'd lead the town. Supporters swarmed them, but Ethan's mother found him first, her embrace warm and fierce. I always knew you'd come back strong, she said, her voice thick. The next morning, Ethan woke to a new reality. His inbox overflowed with congratulatory emails, but also threats, anonymous messages promising to finish what was started. Caleb, ever vigilant, forwarded them to the police. Focus on the good, he urged, but Ethan felt the pressure. Mill Creek was his now, and he had to deliver. His first act as mayor was bold, a town hall meeting, open to all. The auditorium was packed, faces ranging from hopeful to hostile. Ethan stood at the podium, Caleb in the front row, his anchor. I'm here to serve everyone, Ethan began, his voice steady. Not just those who voted for me, but those who didn't. Mill Creek can be a place where no one is cast out. Some clapped, others crossed their arms. He outlined plans: economic growth, better schools, and a community center for all, including LGBTQ youth. The room buzzed, some with excitement, others with skepticism. Change was slow. Ethan's first months were a battle against bureaucracy and old grudges. The town council, stacked with Hargrove's allies, resisted his initiatives. Budget meetings turned into shouting matches, with one councilman calling Ethan's inclusivity push a gay agenda. Ethan kept his cool, leaning on Caleb's legal expertise to navigate the pushback. At home, they'd decompress over takeout, Caleb's humor a balm for Ethan's frayed nerves. By mid-2026, progress showed. The community center opened, a safe space for kids who felt like outsiders. Ethan visited often, talking to teens who reminded him of himself at 20, scared, but brave. One boy, 16, told him, I didn't think I could stay here. Now I might. Ethan's heart swelled, but the work wasn't done. Hate still simmered. A local church refused to rent its hall to the center, citing moral objections. Ethan fought back, rallying community support, and won. Caleb's role grew, too. He started a pro bono legal clinic at the center, helping families navigate discrimination cases. His health, though stable, required regular checkups, a reminder of their fragility. Ethan worried constantly, but Caleb brushed it off. We've got too much to do, he'd say, grinning. Their love was a quiet strength, anchoring them through long days and sleepless nights. Opposition didn't vanish. Hargrove, bitter from defeat, funded a recall campaign, claiming Ethan was ruining Mill Creek's values. Flyers reappeared, uglier than before. One night, their car was vandalized. The word fag scratched into the hood. Ethan's anger flared, but Caleb, calm as ever, said, they're loud because they're losing. Ethan channeled his fury into action, doubling down on his policies. He secured state funding for a new library, a symbol of progress in a town stuck in the past. As winter approached, Ethan prepared for his first State of the Town address. He stood in their living room, practicing, while Caleb critiqued his delivery. Less politician, more you, Caleb said, tweaking his tie. Ethan laughed, pulling him close. I wouldn't be here without you, he said. Caleb's eyes softened. We're rewriting history, Ethan. Together. Ethan's State of the Town address was a turning point. The auditorium was packed, standing room only. He spoke from the heart, recounting his exile and return, his voice cracking as he described the night he and Caleb fled. I came back because I believe in Mill Creek, he said. Not the town that chased me out, but the one we can build together. The crowd was split. Some cheered. Others sat stone-faced, but Ethan saw the teens from the community center in the back, their eyes bright with hope. That was enough. The address sparked a shift. Young families and new residents rallied behind Ethan, volunteering for town projects. The library broke ground, its modern design a stark contrast to Mill Creek's faded storefronts. Ethan's approval ratings climbed, but the recall campaign gained traction. 2. Hargrove's allies held rallies, their signs echoing the ones from 20 years ago. Ethan felt the past breathing down his neck, but Caleb kept him steady. "They're fighting a losing battle," he said, poring over legal strategies to counter the recall. In 2027, the community center hosted its first Pride event, a small but bold gathering. Ethan and Caleb attended, hand in hand, as rainbow flags fluttered in the town square. Some locals jeered from across the street, but the crowd, mostly young people and allies, drowned them out with music and laughter. A girl, no older than 17, approached Ethan, tears in her eyes. "I came out to my parents because of you," she said. Ethan hugged her, his own eyes wet. This was why he'd come back. But victory came with a cost. Caleb's health took a turn. A routine checkup revealed the lymphoma had returned, more aggressive this time. Ethan felt the ground shift beneath him. They sat in the doctor's office, hands clasped, as the prognosis sank in months, maybe a year. Caleb, ever defiant, squeezed Ethan's hand. "We've got work to do," he said. "No slowing down." Ethan nodded, but fear clawed at him. He couldn't imagine a world without Caleb. The recall vote loomed, set for spring 2028. Ethan threw himself into campaigning, not just for his job, but for the town's soul. He held town halls, listened to critics, and won over skeptics with his honesty. Caleb, despite his weakening body, was by his side, charming voters and defusing tensions. "You're the heart of this," Ethan told him one night, as Caleb rested on their couch, chemo draining his energy. Caleb smiled weakly. "And you're the muscle." The recall failed, narrowly. Ethan's supporters celebrated, but the victory was bittersweet. Caleb was fading, his once vibrant energy dimmed. Ethan took a leave from his duties, delegating to trusted aides to care for him. They spent days in their garden, Caleb's roses still blooming despite the chill. "I'm proud of you," Caleb said, his voice soft. "You made Mill Creek better." Ethan choked back tears. "We did." Caleb's clinic at the community center became his legacy. He trained volunteers to continue his work, ensuring no one faced discrimination alone. Ethan watched him, marveling at his strength. One night, as they lay together, Caleb whispered, "Promise me you'll keep going. For us." Ethan nodded, unable to speak. He held Caleb close, memorizing every moment. In early 2029, Caleb passed. Ethan was by his side, their hands entwined, as the man who'd been his rock slipped away. The grief was crushing, a void Ethan couldn't fathom filling. Mill Creek mourned with him, the community center draped in black, rainbow flags at half-mast. Even some of Ethan's critics sent condolences, a sign of how far the town had come. Ethan returned to work, hollow but determined. He channeled his grief into action, pushing for a statewide anti-discrimination law in Caleb's name. The bill gained traction, fueled by Ethan's raw, emotional speeches. He spoke of Caleb, of their love, of the fight that had defined their lives. No one should be chased out for who they are, he told lawmakers, his voice breaking. The bill passed, a bittersweet triumph. Mill Creek continued to change. The library opened, a beacon of progress. The community center expanded, offering scholarships for LGBTQ youth. Ethan, now 44, stood taller, his scars a testament to his resilience. But every rose in his garden, every empty chair at his table, reminded him of Caleb. Ethan's grief was a quiet companion, ever present but never paralyzing. He threw himself into his work, determined to honor Caleb's legacy. Mill Creek was transforming. New businesses opened, drawn by Ethan's economic policies. and the town square buzzed with life. The community center, now named the Caleb Winters Center, was a hub for youth, offering counseling, job training, and a safe space to be themselves. Ethan visited often, finding solace in the kids who called it home. His second term as mayor began in 2030, uncontested. The town had embraced him, not just as a leader, but as one of their own. Even some of the old guard softened, attending town events with their families, nodding to Ethan with grudging respect. But he never forgot the cost. Every policy he pushed, every speech he gave, carried Caleb's spirit. The anti-discrimination law, now enforced statewide, was his proudest achievement, a shield for those who'd once been like him. Opposition lingered, though quieter now. A few churches still preached against him, and anonymous letters arrived occasionally, but they lacked the venom of years past. Ethan's mother, now a vocal supporter, helped bridge divides, hosting dinners where old and new Mill Creek met. She'd tell stories of Ethan as a boy, her pride softening even the hardest hearts. Ethan's personal life was quieter. He dated sparingly, never quite ready to fill the space Caleb had left. Friends urged him to move on, but he'd smile and change the subject. His home was still their home to roses, the creaky porch, the photos of their life together. At night, he'd sit with a glass of wine, talking to Caleb as if he were there. "We're doing it," he'd say. "We're changing the world." In 2032, a national LGBTQ organization honored Ethan with an award for his work. The ceremony, held in Atlanta, was a full-circle moment. He stood on a stage, the city skyline glittering behind him, and spoke of Mill Creek, of Caleb, of love that endured hate. The audience gave a standing ovation, but Ethan's eyes were on the empty seat he'd reserved for Caleb. "This is for you," he whispered, clutching the award. Mill Creek's transformation continued. The library became a regional draw, hosting authors and community events. The Pride event grew, now a festival that filled the town square with color and music. Ethan marched each year, a rainbow sash over his suit, joined by kids who'd once been too scared to come out. The town wasn't perfect, old prejudices lingered in quiet corners, but it was healing. Ethan's mother fell ill in 2033, her strength fading. He cared for her as he had Caleb, spending evenings by her bedside, reading her favorite books. She passed peacefully, her last words to Ethan a soft, "You made me proud." Her loss hit hard, but the town rallied around him, a testament to the community he'd built. By 2035, Ethan was a national figure, mentioned as a potential governor. He considered it, but his heart was in Mill Creek. The town had become a model for small-town inclusivity, studied by academics and activists. Ethan welcomed them, sharing his story with a quiet pride. "This was home," he'd say. "It broke me once, but we rebuilt it together." On quiet nights, Ethan walked to the creek where he'd played as a boy. The water still ran clear, the banks lined with wildflowers. He'd sit, remembering the night he and Caleb fled, the fear and the love that had carried them. He'd rebuilt Mill Creek not just for himself, but for every kid who'd ever felt unwanted. The town was his legacy, and Caleb's, too. As his second term neared its end, Ethan began mentoring a young woman, Mia, who'd grown up in the Caleb Winters Center. She was fierce, smart, and openly queer, with dreams of running for office. Ethan saw himself in her, and Caleb, too. "You'll do better than me," he told her, smiling. She laughed, but her eyes were serious. "You showed me I could." In 2037, Ethan announced he wouldn't seek a third term. Mill Creek was thriving, its scars fading, and he felt his work was done. At 52, he was tired but fulfilled, his hair streaked with gray, his eyes carrying the weight of a life well fought. The town threw a farewell event. The square filled with faces young and old, allies and former skeptics. Mia, now a councilwoman, gave a speech, calling Ethan the heart of Mill Creek's rebirth. He smiled, thinking of Caleb, wishing he could see it. Ethan stayed in Mill Creek, moving to a smaller house near the creek. He taught part-time at the community center, sharing his story with kids who hung on his every word. The Caleb Winters Center expanded, now a regional hub, its walls lined with photos of Ethan and Caleb's journey. A plaque at the entrance read, "For Caleb, who taught us to fight with love." Ethan touched it every time he walked in, a quiet ritual. The town's Pride Festival was now a tradition, drawing thousands. Ethan marched each year, a quiet figure among the revelry, his rainbow sash a nod to the past. Kids he'd mentored, now grown, walked with him, their laughter a reminder of how far Mill Creek had come. The church that once led his exile now hosted interfaith events, its pastor a young woman who preached love over judgment. Ethan's national profile grew, though he shunned the spotlight. He wrote a memoir, Chased Out, called Back, dedicating it to Caleb. It became a bestseller, its raw honesty resonating with readers. Royalties funded scholarships at the center, ensuring Caleb's legacy lived on. Ethan spoke at conferences, his voice steady as he told their story, urging others to fight for change. "Love is the strongest weapon," he'd say, echoing Caleb's words. Mia ran for mayor in 2040, and Ethan campaigned for her, knocking on doors as he had 15 years before. She won, her victory a testament to the town Ethan had reshaped. At her inauguration, she called him to the stage, handing him a key to the city. "You showed us what's possible," she said. Ethan accepted it, his throat tight, feeling Caleb's presence in the applause. In his final years in Mill Creek, Ethan found peace. He tended a small garden, roses blooming in Caleb's honor. Friends visited often, filling his home with laughter. He never remarried, but he wasn't alone. Mill Creek was his family now. On quiet evenings, he'd walk to the creek, the water a mirror for his memories. He'd talk to Caleb, recounting the town's changes, the kids they'd helped, the love that had endured. One spring morning in 2045, Ethan sat by the creek, a letter from a young man in his hands. The boy, a teenager from a nearby town, wrote of coming out, inspired by Ethan's book. "You made me believe I could stay," the letter read. Ethan smiled, folding it carefully. He looked at the water, the wildflowers, the town he'd rebuilt. "We did it, Caleb," he whispered. Ethan passed that summer, peacefully, in his garden. Mill Creek mourned, but it celebrated, too. The Pride Festival that year was the biggest yet, a sea of color and love. Mia, now mayor, dedicated a new wing of the Caleb Winters Center to Ethan, its walls lined with their story. A statue rose in the town square, a simple figure, holding a rose, with a plaque, "For Ethan and Caleb, who showed us home is worth fighting for." Mill Creek thrived, a beacon of hope in a changing world. Ethan's legacy, and Caleb's, lived in every kid who felt safe, every family that stayed, every heart that opened. They'd been chased out, but they'd returned not with anger, but with love. And that love had changed everything.